I wiped the last glass and watched as evening shadows crept across the walls of my restaurant. Outside the windows of Christiansburg, the first streetlights were coming on, but I stood behind the bar, unable to bring myself to go home. Here, surrounded by the familiar smells of coffee and baking, among these tables that I had arranged with my own hands 30 years ago, I felt calmer than in my empty apartment. 30 years. My goodness, how quickly they flew by. I remember how Harold, my late husband, laughed at my idea of opening a family restaurant. "Bertha, you're crazy," he said, shaking his head. "We don't know anything about the restaurant business." But I was stubborn, and in the end, Bertha's became our joint venture. Harold learned to cook the best steaks in town, and I mastered all the intricacies of running the place. Now I'm 75, and every day I feel the fatigue settling deeper and deeper into my bones. It's harder to get up in the morning, and in the evening my legs ache so much that I just want to fall into a chair and not move anymore. Harold has been gone for 3 years now, and I still sometimes turn around, expecting to see him standing in the kitchen. Habit proved stronger than reason. Back when we first opened, Harold would come to the restaurant every morning with a bouquet of daisies from our garden. He would put them in a small vase on the bar counter and say, "Let our guests know that they will find a warm welcome here." This tradition continued almost until his death. Now I buy flowers at the store myself, but they are not as lively, not as real. Everything changed after his death, not only because I felt lonely, although that is true, but also because I realized that life is short and you have to think about what will remain after you are gone. Harold and I didn't have children, but we had Caden, my grandson, the son of my late daughter Gretchen. Gretchen died of cancer when Caden was only 12. Her husband, a worthless alcoholic, had disappeared from the boy's life even earlier, so Harold and I had to raise our grandson. We tried our best. We took him to baseball games, helped him with his homework, bought him everything he asked for. Maybe we spoiled him too much. Caden grew up to be a handsome boy, tall with dark hair and gray eyes, like Gretchen's. He was smart too, but his personality was developing in a peculiar way. I remember when he was 14, he asked for a new bike. He didn't just ask, he launched a whole campaign. First, he showed me a catalog with pictures and told me about all the advantages of this model. Then he started casually mentioning that all his friends had bikes, and his was the oldest in the whole class. Finally, he staged a scene with Harold, saying that he was ashamed to ride his ancient bike and that the other kids were laughing at him. My grandfather, of course, melted and brought home an $800 bike the next day. Even as a teenager, I noticed that Caden knew how to get his way. Not by screaming or throwing tantrums. No, he was too smart for that. He just knew what words to say and how to look to get what he wanted. It was especially easy with his grandfather. Harold melted at one glance from his grandson and was ready to give him the last thing he had. I sometimes tried to reason with my husband, saying that we were spoiling the boy too much, that we needed to teach him responsibility. But Harold just waved it off. "Bertha, he lost his parents. Shouldn't we compensate him for his grief?" And I fell silent because deep down I felt the same guilt. We really couldn't save Gretchen, couldn't protect her from the life that led to her early cancer. Maybe if we had been more attentive, more persistent. In college, Caden studied business and got good grades, but he still managed to be constantly in need of money for textbooks, for projects, or just for living expenses. I regularly transferred him a few $100s every month without asking any questions. I thought that education was an investment in his future, in our shared future. After college, he returned to Christiansburg and got a job at an insurance company. The salary was not bad for a beginner, but Caden constantly complained that he didn't have enough money. He rented an apartment in a nice neighborhood, drove a new car, and shopped at expensive stores. and I knew where that money was coming from. He would come to me every 2 or 3 weeks, tell me about his difficulties, and I would give him what I could. When Caden turned 22, he brought a girl home, Desdemona, beautiful, bright, with long red hair and green eyes. She didn't talk much, but when she did, she always hit the nail on the head. I immediately sensed something wrong with her, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Maybe it was the way she looked at our house, appraisingly scanning the furniture and paintings, or the way she quickly learned to control Caden, even though he didn't even notice. I remember their first visit. Desdemona sat down in the living room, crossing her legs elegantly, and looked around the room carefully. Her gaze slid over the antique chest of drawers that I had inherited from my grandmother, the paintings on the walls, the silverware in the sideboard. She didn't say anything, just listened as Caden talked about our family traditions, the restaurant, and plans for the future. But I could see how she was memorizing everything, calculating something in her mind. And then she started coming more often, always polite, always smiling, but that smile never reached her eyes. She asked me about the restaurant, whether it was difficult to run a business, whether there were many customers, whether the profits were good. She said she was interested because Caden often talked about our family business, and I, like a foolish old woman, was delighted by this interest, thinking that the girl wanted to become part of the family. They got married 2 years ago. The wedding was lavish. I paid for almost everything because the young couple, as they said, didn't have any money yet. Desdemona wanted exactly that kind of wedding, with expensive flowers, an exquisite banquet, and an orchestra. I spared no expense and was happy for my grandson. I thought that now he would have a family, and I would have a granddaughter who might give me great-grandchildren. The wedding cost me $12,000. Desdemona chose the most expensive dress in the salon and insisted that the banquet be held at the best hotel in town. Caden just shrugged and said, "Grandma, if you don't mind." Desdemona wants everything to be beautiful. And I paid because I saw how happy he was, how his eyes lit up when he looked at his bride. But after the wedding, something changed. Caden started coming less often, and when he did come, he acted distant. Desdemona was also in no hurry to establish a close relationship with me. She was polite, even nice, but I felt a coldness in her smiles. It was as if there was an invisible wall between us that she had no intention of breaking down. I tried to organize family dinners and invited them over on Sundays. I cooked Caden's favorite dishes, set a beautiful table, and wore my best dress. But they came looking like people performing an unpleasant duty. Caden picked at his plate and answered questions in monosyllables. Desdemona smiled and complimented my cooking, but I could see her constantly looking at her watch. And then the talk about the restaurant began. At first, it was casual, between other topics. Caden was interested in business, asking about profits and losses. Desdemona would add something like, "Grandma, you're so tired. Maybe it's time to think about taking a break." And every time, these words echoed in me with a sense of unease that I tried not to notice. I began to notice strange things. For example, Desdemona knew more about the restaurant's financial affairs than she should have, or how she studied documents when she thought I wasn't looking. Once, I came back from the kitchen and found her at my desk. She quickly moved away and said she was just admiring the framed photo of Harold, but I saw that the papers were not where I had left them. 3 months ago, I discovered that money was missing from the cash register. At first, it was small amounts, then more and more. I checked all the receipts and counted the takings several times, but the figures didn't add up. Someone was taking the cash, and they were doing it quite skillfully, so the shortfall wasn't immediately apparent. I installed a small camera in the back room, aimed at the safe. What I saw a week later broke my heart. Caden would come to the restaurant late at night when I was already leaving for home. He had keys. I had given them to him a long time ago when he was still in school and sometimes helped me after class. He would open the safe, take out the money, count it, and put some of it in his pocket. In 3 months, he stole more than $4,000. My money. Money that I had earned over 30 years, standing on my feet 12 hours a day, smiling at customers even when my head was splitting with fatigue. And I kept quiet because I didn't know what to say, how to explain to him that stealing from his own grandmother was the worst thing he could do, because I hoped he would come to his senses on his own, that these were temporary difficulties, that he would return the money, because I was afraid of losing him for good. This morning, Caden called and said he would come by in the evening to talk about something important. I spent the whole day agonizing over what it could be, but deep down, I already knew what it would be about. In recent months, he had been talking more and more about how hard it was for me to run the restaurant alone, how tired I looked, how I needed a break. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I glanced at the clock. It was 8:30 in the evening. The restaurant had been closed for an hour, but I still hadn't left, as if delaying the inevitable. The keys turned in the lock, and Caden and Desdemona entered the room. My grandson looked tense. His suit fit him perfectly. Dark gray, expensive, bought, as I remembered, with my money for his new job at the insurance company. Desdemona was wearing a black dress and pearl earrings, her hair styled elegantly. They looked like a couple from a magazine, and for some reason that made me even more anxious. "Grandma, are you still here?" Caden hugged me, but the hug felt formal, perfunctory. "We thought you were already home." "I was delayed a little," I replied, pulling away and looking intently into his eyes. "You said you wanted to talk about something important." Desdemona silently walked over to one of the tables and sat down, crossing her legs gracefully. Her face was calm, almost indifferent, but I noticed how closely she was watching our every move. "Yes, Grandma." Caden ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood. "Desdemona and I have been thinking a lot about your situation. You work too much, you look tired. At your age, it's time to think about yourself." I felt something tighten in my chest. "My situation?" "Yes." He sat down at the same table as his wife and patted the chair next to him. "Sit down, Grandma. Don't stand there. We want to help you." I slowly approached the table and sat down across from them, feeling the tension in the air. Desdemona sat upright, her hands neatly folded in her lap, and looked at me with an expression of sympathetic concern. But in her green eyes, I saw something else, something cold and calculating. "Help me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Caden leaned across the table toward me, and for a moment I thought I was looking at the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. "Grandma, take an honest look at yourself. When was the last time you took a break? When was the last time you went somewhere, met up with friends?" I wanted to answer, but realized I didn't know what to say. Friends, most of them had already died or moved to other cities to be with their children. And rest? After Harold's death, I just didn't see the point in traveling or entertainment. The restaurant had become my only joy and my only pain at the same time. "You see," Caden continued gently, "you work 7 days a week, from morning till night. That's not right at your age." Desdemona nodded with an understanding look. "Caden told me that you get up at 6 in the morning to receive suppliers and don't get home until 9 at night. That's an impossible workload for a 75-year-old woman." I looked at her more closely. How did she know my daily routine in such detail? Caden hadn't been to the restaurant in the mornings for years, so she must have gotten this information some other way. Maybe she asked the staff? Or was she watching me? "I'm managing," I said, but even to myself my voice sounded uncertain. "You're managing for now," Caden interjected. "What if something serious happens tomorrow? What if you fall, slip, or have a heart attack? Who will run the restaurant? Those words hit me harder than I expected because I had been thinking about that myself. Every time I felt dizzy from exhaustion, every time I felt my heart beating unevenly after lifting heavy boxes, every time I woke up in the middle of the night with back pain, I thought about the same thing. Desdemona seemed to sense my confusion and immediately took advantage of it. We don't want to scare you, but we have to be realistic. You are no longer young, and the restaurant business is a huge responsibility. Customers, suppliers, employees, everything depends on you. Is it fair to take on such a burden? I noticed how skillfully she avoided the words grandmother or Bertha, addressing me impersonally. It was as if I were not a relative, but simply an elderly woman with whom she was conducting business negotiations. The restaurant is my life, I said quietly. No, Grandma. Caden stretched out and covered my hand with his. The restaurant was your life when Grandpa was alive. Back then, you worked together and supported each other. But now you're alone, and that's a different story. His hand was warm, and for a moment I felt the same warmth I had felt as a child when he came to me for comfort. But then I looked into his eyes and saw something that made me wary. Calculation. He looked at me the way you look at an obstacle that needs to be carefully removed from the road. We're offering you help, he continued. I can take over the management of the restaurant. I have an education and business experience, and you can finally relax and take care of yourself. Desdemona nodded. Imagine how wonderful it would be to wake up not to an alarm clock, but when you feel like it. Read books, watch TV, meet people your own age. Don't you deserve that kind of life after so many years of hard work? I was silent, thinking about their words. On the one hand, they were making sense. I was really tired. Every morning was a struggle with my own body, which protested louder and louder against the strain. Every evening I fell into bed feeling like a squeezed lemon peel. But on the other hand, the restaurant was the only thing that connected me to Harold, to our shared dream. This was where our memories were, where I felt his presence. Giving this place to someone else, even if it was my own grandson, felt like a betrayal of our love. What about the restaurant's traditions? I asked. The special recipes? The atmosphere? Caden smiled, and that smile seemed too confident to me. Of course, we'll keep all the best parts, but we'll also add something new, something modern. Maybe we'll update the interior, expand the menu. The interior? I looked around the room that Harold and I had furnished with such love. The wooden tables we had picked out at the flea market, the paintings by local artists on the walls, the antique piano in the corner that our regular customer, Mr. Francis, sometimes played in the evenings. Desdemona stood up and walked around the room as if assessing the space. It's all very cozy, of course, but it looks a little outdated. Modern customers expect a different aesthetic. Her words cut me to the heart. Outdated? This place, where every detail had been chosen with love, where every item held a story? But the interior isn't the most important thing, Caden quickly added, apparently noticing my expression. The most important thing is caring for you. We want you to be happy. I remembered how he had changed after getting married. Before, when he came to the restaurant, he was always genuinely interested in how things were going. He asked about regular customers and recalled stories from his childhood when he helped us with Harold. He loved to hear stories about how we started the business and what difficulties we overcame. After the wedding, everything changed. His questions became more specific and businesslike. He was interested in turnover, profits, and expenses. He stopped paying attention to the little things that made the restaurant special. How Mrs. Collins ordered the same apple pie every Tuesday, or how the young couple at the corner table celebrated their anniversary every month. Desdemona, meanwhile, returned to the table and sat down again. She took a small mirror out of her purse and touched up her lipstick, as if our conversation were no more important to her than a chance encounter on the street. You know what bothers me, Grandma? Said Caden, leaning toward me. You live only for your work. You have no hobbies, no interests. When I was little, you loved to read and embroider. Remember how you embroidered those beautiful napkins for the kitchen? I remembered. I remembered how in the evenings, when Caden was doing his homework and Harold was reading the newspaper, I would sit by the window with my embroidery hoop and embroider. It was calming and helped me relax after a hard day's work. But after my husband died, I seemed to have forgotten how to enjoy such simple things. You could take up needlework again, he continued, or sign up for painting classes. Go to a senior citizens club. A senior citizens club, I repeated, and the word sounded like a sentence. So I had officially moved into the category of those who must live out their days surrounded by other old and useless people? Desdemona closed the mirror and looked at me with sincere concern. We understand that this is a difficult decision. The restaurant means a lot to you. But sometimes you have to let go of the past to make room for the future. The past? I felt anger rising within me. It's not the past. It's my home, my work, your life, Caden finished for me. We understand that, but life must go on. You have given me so much love, care, education. Now, let me give something back to you peace, rest, freedom from worry. His words sounded beautiful, noble, but something in his tone, in the way he avoided looking me in the eye, made me doubt his sincerity. What if I refuse? I asked quietly. Caden and Desdemona exchanged glances. It was a brief glance, but I noticed something in it that made me shiver. Of course no one can force you, Caden said, but there was a steely note in his voice. But think about it realistically. You're not getting any younger. Sooner or later, you'll have to hand things over to someone else anyway. Isn't it better to do it now while you can still control the process? Desdemona nodded. And while the family can help, Caden has known the restaurant since childhood. He understands its specifics. If you wait well, until circumstances force you to make a decision, it may be too late. Circumstances? I asked. Well, illness, accident. Desdemona spread her arms. We don't want to think about it, but we have to be prepared for anything. I sat silently, feeling the world around me changing. These two people, whom I considered my family, were talking about me as if I already had one foot in the grave, as if my opinion, my feelings, didn't matter in the face of the inexorable passage of time. Caden took my hand again. Grandma, we're not rushing you. Think about what we've said. We only want what's best for you. But I saw him looking around the restaurant, his gaze lingering on the old cash register, on the worn but comfortable chairs, and I knew that in his mind, plans for change were already taking shape, plans that would sweep away everything that was dear to me and Harold. Desdemona stood up first. We have to go, but promise us you'll think about what we said. We really care about you. Caden also stood up and leaned over to kiss me on the cheek. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? They left, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. I sat at the table, staring at the door they had walked out of, trying to understand what had just happened. My grandson, whom I had raised as a son, had essentially suggested that I retire, and his wife was looking at my restaurant with the eyes of an appraiser, estimating how much she could get for old things. 3 days later, Caden showed up at the restaurant again. This time, he came alone, with a leather folder under his arm and a serious expression on his face. It was around 2 in the afternoon, between the lunch rush and the evening bustle, when only 2 regular customers remained in the dining room at a corner table. Grandma, have you thought about our conversation? He asked, sitting down across from me at the same table where we had talked last time. I had thought about it. I had hardly slept for 3 days, agonizing over their arguments. On the one hand, they were right. I was really tired, and every day it became harder and harder to work. Yesterday morning, my head was spinning so much that I almost fell while climbing the stairs to the basement to get some wine. And the day before yesterday, I forgot to turn off the stove and only realized it 2 hours later when I smelled burning sauce. I thought about it. I nodded. Caden opened the folder and took out several documents. I consulted a lawyer and drew up some preliminary papers. Nothing final, just so you can see what it will look like officially. The papers were printed on good white paper with the law firm's stamp. I skimmed through the lines, but the legal language seemed like Chinese to me. It talked about the transfer of ownership, the responsibilities of the parties, some guarantees and obligations. It's all pretty simple, Caden explained, noticing my confusion. You transfer ownership of the restaurant to me, and I promise to preserve its atmosphere and traditions. Plus, of course, I'll pay you a monthly allowance. Allowance? I asked. Yes, something like a pension. $500 a month. That should be enough for your needs. $500. The restaurant brought in about $4,000 a month in net profit, and he was offering me $500, 1/8 of what my own business brought in. That's not much, I said cautiously. Caden frowned. Grandma, you understand that the restaurant has expenses. Rent, salaries, supplies, taxes. There's not much left of the profit. But I knew those numbers better than he did. I knew every expense, every supplier, every tax. And I knew he was just deceiving me. Besides, he added, now you won't have to worry about anything. No worries, no responsibilities. $500 in cash is great. He spoke as if he were doing me a favor, as if $500 for a restaurant worth several hundred thousand was a generous gift. I took the pen he handed me and stared at the signature on the documents for a long time. Caden Clancy, it said in bold handwriting. He had already signed all the papers. All that was left was my consent. What if something goes wrong? I asked. What if the restaurant doesn't make a profit? Caden smiled, and there was something condescending about that smile. Don't worry about it. I have plans to develop the business. I think in a year or two, profits will increase significantly. Plans for development. I remembered Desdemona's words about renovating the interior, about modern aesthetics. I imagined how our old tables, paintings, and Mr. Francis's piano would disappear. How this place would turn into a faceless cafe, devoid of the warmth that Harold and I had created over the years. But then I thought about how tired I was, how hard it was for me to get up in the morning, how my back hurt at the end of the day. I thought about how sooner or later I would really have to leave my job, and then what? Caden would inherit the restaurant anyway, but then I wouldn't have any guarantees, any documents that would secure me at least those $500. Okay, I said quietly, but I want to make one condition. Caden was alert. What is it? I want to come here sometimes. Just sit, drink coffee, talk to the regulars. Will that be possible? He breathed a sigh of relief. Of course, Grandma. You will always be a welcome guest here. A welcome guest. I will be a welcome guest in my own restaurant. I signed the papers, feeling my fingers tremble. Caden immediately took the papers, neatly folded them into a folder, and smiled. I'm so glad we were able to come to an agreement. Now you can finally relax. Desdemona walked in. She was wearing a white coat and high boots, looking elegant and confident. So, is everything ready? Caden nodded, showing her the folder. Yes, Grandma signed the papers. Desdemona came over and kissed me on the cheek. Her lips were cold. How wonderful! Now you can live peacefully without worrying about business. She looked around the room and I noticed her gaze linger on the old cash register, the worn upholstery on the chairs, the faded photographs on the walls. Her eyes showed impatience, as if she could already see it all disappearing and giving way to something new and modern. By the way, she said, turning to Caden, I spoke to the designer. He can come tomorrow to look at the premises. The designer? I asked. Caden glanced quickly at his wife, and I realized they weren't going to tell me about this so soon. Well, it's not definite yet. We just want to see what can be improved. But I just signed the papers, I said, confused. Shouldn't we wait at least a week? Desdemona laughed, and the laugh sounded fake to me. Why wait? The sooner we start working, the better for everyone. Caden stood up and put on his coat. I need to go to the notary to register the documents. And you, Grandma, can go home. Desdemona will stay here and look after the restaurant. Look after it. I felt something tighten in my chest. But I can still work for a few more days, hand things over gradually. No need, Caden said gently but firmly. You've worked too hard already. It's time to rest. Desdemona had already gone behind the bar and opened the cash register. I'll take care of today's takings. I have experience working with finances. Experience working with finances. Where did she get that experience? Caden said she worked in a beauty salon, then in a clothing boutique. That had nothing to do with the restaurant business or finances. But Caden was already kissing me goodbye. Rest, Grandma. I'll stop by tomorrow and let you know how things are going. I slowly gathered my things, my purse, a light scarf, my apartment keys. In my purse was a copy of the documents I had signed. Caden insisted that I take them with me, for my own records, as he put it. The regulars at the corner table, Mr. and Mrs. Collins, looked on in surprise. They were used to me always being there, greeting them at the door and showing them to their favorite spot. Mrs. Clancy, are you going away somewhere? Mrs. Collins asked. No, I have more free time now, I replied, trying to smile. Desdemona looked up from the cash register. Bertha has decided to pass the restaurant on to younger hands, a wise decision at her age. At her age? She was talking about me in the third person, even though I was standing right there. Mr. Collins frowned. What about the menu, the apple pie? Everything will stay the same, Caden said quickly. My wife and I will just be running it. But Desdemona was already leafing through a notebook with notes, and you could see from her face that she was already making changes in her mind. I reached the door and turned around. Desdemona was standing behind the bar like a hostess, and Caden was talking on the phone, apparently to the designer. The regular customers looked confused. See you tomorrow, I said, but no one seemed to hear me. It was cool outside, and it was starting to drizzle. I walked slowly along the familiar streets of Christiansberg, holding the keys to the restaurant in my hands, which I would no longer need tomorrow. In my pocket was a copy of the documents, now the only thing that connected me to my life's work. At home, I sat down in a chair by the window and stared out at the street for a long time. Neighbors were returning from work. Children were playing in the yard. Life was going on as usual. And for the first time in 30 years, I didn't know what I would be doing tomorrow morning. Maybe Caden was right. Maybe at 75, it really was time to think about retirement. Maybe I was too used to working and didn't know how to live any other way. He promised to take care of me, pay me regularly, and preserve the restaurant's traditions. But then, why did I feel like I had made a terrible mistake? Why did it feel like I had signed not the documents for the transfer of the family business, but my own death warrant? In the evening, Caden called. Grandma, how are you? How are you feeling? Fine, I lied. That's good. By the way, the documents have already been registered. Now it's official. So quickly? Why delay? His voice sounded impatient, which he tried to hide behind feigned concern. The sooner we get everything done, the sooner you can fully relax. I wanted to ask about the designer, about the plans for changes, about when I could come to the restaurant. But Caden was already talking about things that needed to be taken care of and promised to call back tomorrow. After hanging up, I realized that for the first time in many years, I was afraid of tomorrow. And this feeling of fear grew, despite all the reasonable arguments I tried to find in favor of the decision I had made. I didn't go to the restaurant for a week as I had promised. I tried to get used to my new life, read books that I had bought but never found the time to read, watched TV, and even tried embroidery. But my hands were shaking, the threads got tangled, and I quickly gave up. By the end of the week, I felt like I was going crazy from idleness. On Friday morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I put on my best dress, did my hair, and went to the restaurant. After all, Caden promised that I would always be a welcome guest there. I just wanted to sit at my favorite table, drink coffee, and see how things were going. When I approached the familiar building, my heart began to beat faster. The sign at Bertha's was still hanging in its usual place, but something had changed. There were new curtains in the windows, bright, with geometric patterns that didn't match the old wooden furniture inside at all. I pushed the door open and went inside. The smell had changed, too. Instead of the familiar aroma of homemade baking and coffee, there was a sharp chemical smell of paint and varnish in the air. Desdemona was standing behind the bar in a bright red dress, talking on the phone and writing something down in a notebook. The room was almost empty. Only one table was occupied by an elderly woman I didn't recognize. Our regular customers were nowhere to be seen. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, who came every day at the same time, were also absent. Desdemona noticed me and quickly ended her conversation. "Oh, Bertha, what a surprise." "I decided to stop by and see how things were going," I said, trying to smile. "Caden promised I could always come." Desdemona nodded, but her smile seemed forced to me. Of course, of course. We're just doing a little renovation, so not everything is in the best shape." I looked around the hall and gasped. Half of our old tables were gone. In their place were modern metal structures with plastic tabletops. Paintings by local artists had been taken off the walls, leaving light rectangles on the faded wallpaper. And in the corner where Mr. Francis's piano used to stand, there was now a gaping void. "Where's the piano?" I asked in a weak voice. "Oh, that old wreck?" Desdemona waved her hand. "We sold it. It took up too much space, and only one old man played it." "Mr. Francis played it every night for 15 years, I whispered. "Exactly. The same thing every day, the same old songs. The customers got tired of it. We're installing a modern music system." I walked over to the bar, holding on to it so I wouldn't fall. "Where's Caden?" "He's at the bank, arranging a loan for the expansion. We have big plans." At that moment, the door opened and my grandson walked in. He was wearing a new suit, even more expensive than usual, with gold cufflinks I hadn't seen before. When he saw me, he was momentarily taken aback, but quickly regained his composure. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" His tone surprised me. It wasn't the joy of seeing me, nor the usual warmth, but a kind of wariness, even irritation. "I wanted to see how things were going. You said I could always come." Caden exchanged glances with his wife. Of course, of course. It's just that we're in the middle of renovations and everything is turned upside down." I looked around the room again. Where are our regular customers? The Collinses? Mr. Francis? "They're adjusting to the changes," Caden replied evasively. "Not everyone accepts new things right away." Desdemona added, "We're targeting a younger audience. Modern people want modern service." "What about Mrs. Collins's apple pie? The one she ordered every Tuesday?" "We've updated the menu," said Caden. "We've removed items that didn't sell well." "But that pie was her favorite. She's been coming for it for 30 years. Grandma, Caden sighed, you can't live in the past. The business has to evolve. I wanted to sit at my favorite table by the window, but it was gone too. In its place was a tall bar counter with metal stools. Maybe I'll have a coffee? I asked. Desdemona looked at her watch. Of course, but it will be $5. $5? I couldn't believe my ears. For a cup of coffee? We've raised our prices in line with our new level of service, she explained, but now the coffee is imported from Italy. $5. A cup of coffee used to cost $1.50, and it never occurred to me to charge regular customers who just wanted to sit and talk. I took out my wallet, but my hands were shaking. Caden noticed and glanced impatiently at his watch. You know what, Grandma? Maybe another time? We have a very busy day today. The designer will be here in half an hour. We need to discuss the renovation plans. But I just got here. Yes, I understand, but you can see how everything is turned upside down here. It's better to come when we're all done. In a month or two. In a month or two. He didn't want me to be here now. He didn't want me to see how they were destroying everything that was dear to me. Caden, but you promised I would be a welcome guest. My grandson turned sharply toward me, and I saw something in his eyes that made me take a step back. Coldness, irritation, and something else. Contempt? Listen, Grandma, he said, his voice hardening. Thank you for the restaurant. Really, thank you. But now get out of here and don't interfere with our work. The world around me began to sway. The words hung in the air, and I couldn't believe I had heard them correctly. Did my Caden say that? The boy I raised, fed, clothed, to whom I gave all my savings and all my labor? What did you say? I whispered. Desdemona approached me, a polite but cold smile playing on her face. Bertha, you must understand your new position. The restaurant now belongs to us. You no longer have any authority here. But Caden promised many things, she interrupted. But now he's the owner, and he makes the decisions. And you're just the former owner who receives a small allowance out of our kindness. Out of their kindness, $500 a month for a restaurant that I had built over 30 years, they called kindness. Besides, Desdemona continued, your presence here may confuse new customers. They shouldn't see that the former owner still comes here. It creates the wrong impression. The wrong impression? I repeated, feeling my anger rising. Caden stood next to his wife, and they looked at me as one. Grandma, we don't want to hurt you, but the reality is that you're no longer the owner here. You signed the papers, remember? I remember. Of course I remember. How could I forget the biggest mistake of my life? We'll send you money every month, Desdemona added. Right on time, don't worry. But you don't need to come here anymore. I don't? You don't. She walked to the door and held it open. Now this is our place, our plans, our future. And you, enjoy your well-deserved rest. I stood in the middle of the hall that had been my home just a week ago and looked at the two people I considered family. Caden avoided my gaze, studying something on his phone screen. Desdemona waited patiently for me to leave, with the expression of someone showing an intrusive visitor the door. So, that's how it is, I said quietly. So you're using me, taking my restaurant, and throwing me away like a used rag. No one is using anyone, Caden objected, but there was uncertainty in his voice. We're just giving you a chance to rest. By making me rest where I'm told to and only come when I'm allowed to? Desdemona sighed. Bertha, don't be dramatic. You're getting paid. No one is kicking you out onto the street. Just accept reality. Reality. The reality was that I had given away the most precious thing I had to people who saw me only as an obstacle to their goals. I silently walked to the exit, but stopped at the door. I took the white envelope I had brought with me out of my purse and placed it on the nearest table. "What's that?" Desdemona asked. "Open it and find out," I replied without turning around. Caden looked up from his phone. "Grandma, what's in the envelope?" But I was already walking out the door, leaving them alone with something that could change all their plans. Outside, I stopped and looked back. Through the window, I could see Desdemona picking up the envelope, and her and Caden leaning over it. I could see their faces change as they read the contents. First, surprise, then anxiety, and then real horror. I turned and slowly walked away from the restaurant that was no longer my home. In my pocket were the keys to my apartment, in my purse, a little money, and the documents for the transfer of the restaurant. I had nothing else, but I knew that in that envelope was something that would make Caden and Desdemona understand that betraying your family is not as easy as they thought, and that some mistakes come at a high price for those who make them. Behind me, I heard the restaurant door open and someone run out into the street shouting my name, but I didn't turn around. The time for talking was over. At home, I locked the door and sat down in a chair by the window. My hands were still shaking, my heart was beating unevenly, and I couldn't calm down. Caden's words echoed in my head over and over again. "Thanks for the restaurant, but now get lost." How could he say that? How could he turn from a loving grandson into a cold, calculating person who throws me away like a useless thing? I closed my eyes and tried to understand when it all went wrong. When did the boy I raised, to whom I gave all my love, become a stranger? Maybe I was to blame for spoiling him too much, for not teaching him to appreciate what he had. The sun was setting, and the room was gradually sinking into twilight. I didn't get up to turn on the light. I wanted to sit in the dark and think. Think about how blind I was, how naive, how easily I believed their words of care and love. Memories flooded back. I remember how 3 months ago, I first noticed that there was money missing from the cash register. At first, I thought I had simply miscounted. That happened, especially at the end of a difficult day, when my head was no longer working properly. But the next day, the shortage happened again, and then again and again. I started keeping more careful records, checking every receipt, every transaction, and every time the numbers didn't add up, money was disappearing from the cash register. At first, $30 or $40, then larger amounts. Over the first month, more than $1,000 was stolen. I remember sitting in the empty restaurant after closing, holding the records of the shortages in my hands, trying to figure out which of the employees could have done it. Maria, who had been working as a waitress for 5 years? James, my chef, who had been with me since the opening? Or Sarah, the young cashier I had hired just 6 months ago? The thought that it could be Caden never even crossed my mind. Of course, he had keys. I gave them to him back in high school when he sometimes helped clean up after school. But why would he steal from his own grandmother? He had a job, and I always helped him out with money when he asked. But suspicion still crept into my mind. I noticed that Caden had started coming by the restaurant more often in the evenings, supposedly just to check on me. He would come when I was about to go home, walk me to the door, and offer to help close up. I was happy about this attention, thinking that he was finally showing interest in the family business. And then there was that evening when I forgot my glasses at home and went back to get them. It was around 10 o'clock at night. The restaurant had long since closed, and the streets were empty. I approached the building and saw light in the windows. My heart skipped a beat. Had someone broken in? But when I looked through the window, I saw Caden. He was standing with his back to me at the open safe, counting money. The bills were lying in neat stacks on the table. Caden took some of the money, put it in his pocket, and returned the rest to the safe. I stood at the window and watched the scene, unable to believe my eyes. My grandson, whom I had raised, who called me the most precious person in the world, was stealing from me, calmly, methodically, as if it were his legal right. At that moment, I wanted to go into the restaurant and demand an explanation, but I couldn't. I just stood there and watched my world collapse. How the person I trusted most in the world betrayed that trust. Caden closed the safe, turned off the lights, and left through the back door. I waited until he disappeared into the darkness, and only then did I enter the restaurant. I checked the safe. The money was indeed missing. About $200 from the evening's takings had disappeared. I sat down at my desk and cried until morning. Not because of the money, although that was important too, because of the pain, because of the realization that the grandson I loved like a son saw me only as a source of easy money. The next day, I set up a hidden camera, small, inconspicuous, aimed at the safe, not to catch Caden red-handed. I already knew who the thief was, but to have evidence in case I needed it. The camera footage confirmed my worst suspicions. Caden came to the restaurant 2 or 3 times a week, always late at night when the streets were empty. He knew the patrol car's schedule, knew when it was safe to act. He opened the safe with his keys, took the money, and calmly walked away. In 3 months, he stole $4,243. I remembered the exact amount because I kept detailed records of each theft, and I kept quiet because I hoped that these were temporary difficulties, that he would come to his senses and stop, because I was afraid of losing him for good, because I didn't know how to accuse my own grandson of theft. But my silence didn't help. Caden didn't stop. On the contrary, he became bolder, and he started bringing Desdemona with him. Yes, I saw her on the camera recordings. I saw her standing on the stirrup while her husband rummaged through the safe, counting the money and nodding her head in approval of the size of the haul. How they kissed after a successful operation, rejoicing in their easy money. It was then, a month ago, that I realized I had to prepare for the worst, that their talk about my health and the need for rest was not concern, but a prelude to taking over the restaurant. I went to a lawyer, old Mr. Foster, who had handled Harold's affairs during his lifetime. I told him about the situation and showed him the camera footage. Mr. Foster shook his gray head and said, "Mrs. Clancy, family matters are the most painful, but you must protect yourself." We drew up a new will. According to it, in the event of any attempts at fraud or coercion on the part of the heirs, all my property would go to a charitable foundation that helps the homeless. The house, savings, insurance, everything. "What about the restaurant?" I asked. "You already gave the restaurant to your grandson while you were alive," Mr. Foster reminded me. "But if you can prove that the deal was made under duress or as a result of fraud, it can be challenged. Proving coercion was difficult. Formally, no one forced me to sign the documents, but the camera footage showing Caden's thefts could be grounds for terminating the deal. Mr. Foster made several copies of all the documents and recordings. He kept one in his safe and gave me another. "Just in case," he said, "if something happens to the originals." I also wrote a detailed letter in which I recounted the entire history of my relationship with Caden, told about the thefts, and how I was coerced into transferring the restaurant. That letter also went into Mr. Foster's safe. "I hope none of this will be necessary," the old lawyer said as we parted, "but it's better to be prepared for any turn of events." How right he was. Today, when Caden told me to get lost, I realized that all my preparations had not been in vain. In the envelope I left at the restaurant were copies of the camera recordings and an excerpt from the new will. Let them know that their crimes have been recorded. Let them understand that I am not the helpless old woman they think I am. The phone rang. Caden's name appeared on the screen. I stared at the flashing display for a long time, but didn't answer. Then he called again. And again. On the fifth call, I turned off my phone. In the evening, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Desdemona. She was standing on the landing with a bouquet of flowers and a guilty smile. But I didn't open the door. Let her stand there. The time for talking was over. She stood at the door for 20 minutes, ringing the bell periodically. Then, apparently realizing that I wasn't going to open the door, she left. She left the flowers on the doormat. In the morning, when I went out to the store, the flowers were still there, wilted, unwanted, just like their apologies. There was a letter from Caden in the mailbox, handwritten on expensive paper. He wrote that he and Desdemona didn't mean to hurt me, that they were just nervous about the renovation, that I would always be a welcome guest at the restaurant, and that he loved me very much. Lies. Every word was a lie. If he loved me, how could he have stolen from me for months? How could he have told me to get lost with such contempt in his voice? I tore up the letter and threw it in the trash. Then I took Kaiden's photos out of the closet. Childhood, school, graduation. I looked at them for a long time, remembering the boy I had raised, who used to come to me with scraped knees and memorized poems. Where was that boy? When did he disappear and turn into a cold-hearted swindler who saw his own grandmother as nothing more than a source of money? Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I spoiled him too much, didn't teach him to value hard work and honesty. Or maybe it was Desdemona who changed him, made him greedy and heartless. Or maybe he was always like that, and I just didn't want to notice it. Blind love often blinds us to the truth. It was getting dark outside. I turned on the light and sat down to write a letter to Mr. Foster in which I recounted today's events in detail. How they kicked me out of my own restaurant. How they humiliated and insulted me. This letter will be the final nail in the coffin of their plans. Now I have not only evidence of theft, but also evidence of coercion and abuse. Caden thinks he has won, that he got the restaurant and got rid of the annoying old woman. But he doesn't yet know the price he will have to pay for betraying his family. Tomorrow I will take the letter to Mr. Foster, and then I will start a new life. A life without illusions about family love, without false hopes for gratitude. A life in which I will rely only on myself, because the most painful betrayal is the betrayal of those we loved most in the world. Desdemona took the envelope from the table and turned it over in her hands. It was ordinary, white, unsigned, but something about the way Bertha had left it made her wary. The old woman left too calmly for someone who had just been kicked out of her own restaurant. What could be in there? Caden asked, coming closer. He still felt awkward after that scene. Maybe he had been too harsh with her? But Desdemona was right. He couldn't let the former owner interfere with his business. Probably a sentimental note, Desdemona snorted. Something like, "I wish you luck in your new venture," or "preserve the restaurant's traditions." She opened the envelope and took out several sheets of paper. On top was a photograph, black and white, grainy, clearly taken with a hidden camera. The photo showed a man standing next to an open safe with money in his hands. The man was turned in profile, but his face was clearly visible. Caden froze. It was him. "What the hell?" he began, but Desdemona was already leafing through the other papers. The next photograph was even clearer. In it, Caden was counting money, and Desdemona was standing next to him, looking out the window, apparently watching to see if anyone was coming. The date on the photo was from last month. Desdemona turned pale. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the photos. There were more than 20 of them, a detailed chronology of their nightly visits to the restaurant over the past 3 months. She knew everything, Desdemona whispered. That old witch knew all along. Caden snatched the papers from her hands. In addition to the photos, there was a printed list of dates and amounts. February 27th, $180. March 3rd, $220. March 10th, $150. And so on, neatly, methodically, right up to last week. At the end of the list was the total amount of money stolen over 3 months, $4,243. 4,000, Caden said hoarsely. My God, we stole $4,000. Shut up, Desdemona snapped. It wasn't theft, it was our fair share. We knew the restaurant would soon be ours. But her voice trembled. She understood that a fair share and theft were two different things, and that the photographs looked exactly like evidence of a crime. Caden reached the last page and froze. It was a copy of the will, an official document on the letterhead of the law firm Foster and Sons, certified with the seal and signature of a notary public. In the event of coercion, fraud, theft, or other criminal behavior on the part of the heirs toward the testator, all property of Bertha Elizabeth Clancy, including real estate, bank accounts, insurance policies, and other assets, shall pass into the full ownership of the Christiansburg Homeless Assistance Charitable Foundation. Desdemona read it aloud, stumbling over every word. What does that mean? It means we're in deep shit, Caden replied grimly. Deep, deep shit. He counted the photos again. 23 pictures of him and his wife clearly stealing money from the safe, dates, amounts, detailed records, and a will that strips them of everything if the crime is proven. But wait, Desdemona grasped at straws. The restaurant is already ours. She signed the transfer papers. This will only affect her other assets. Caden shook his head. You don't understand. If they prove that we forced her to sign the papers, the deal could be declared invalid. And these photos are direct evidence that we were stealing from her. Desdemona began pacing nervously around the room, but she kept quiet. She knew about the thefts for 3 months and said nothing. Why didn't she say anything? Because she hoped we would come to our senses, Caden replied gloomily, or because she was gathering evidence. Either way, now she has everything she needs to destroy us. He remembered how strange his grandmother had been acting in recent months, how intently she had looked at him when he entered the restaurant, how she had asked questions about his work, about money, about his plans for the future. He thought she was just getting old and becoming suspicious, but she was just testing her suspicions. We need to talk to her, Desdemona said. Explain that it was a misunderstanding, that we didn't mean to steal from her. A misunderstanding? Caden laughed bitterly. We systematically stole from her for 3 months and then kicked her out of her own restaurant. What the hell kind of misunderstanding is that? Desdemona stopped in front of him. Then what do you suggest? Give up? Give her restaurant back? I don't know, Caden exploded. I don't know what to do. We're in deep shit. He took out his phone and dialed Bertha's number. The phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. He tried again, same result. She's not picking up, he said grimly. Then let's go to her house, Desdemona said decisively. Right now, we'll talk face to face. They locked up the restaurant and got in the car. Caden drove in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Desdemona leafed through the photos, trying to find some loophole, some way to justify themselves. Maybe we can say it wasn't us, she suggested, that someone faked the photos? Our faces are clearly visible in the photos, Caden reminded her, and the dates match our visits to the restaurant. Then let's say we were just checking security, that we were concerned that Grandma was leaving her money in an unreliable safe. Caden looked at her as if she were crazy. And that's why we pocketed some of the money? Very convincing. Desdemona slumped. She knew there were no excuses. The photos were too clear and their actions too obvious. Bertha's house stood in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by old maple trees and neat lawns. The windows on the first floor were lit, which meant she was home. Caden parked at the gate and sat for a few minutes, gathering his courage. "What are we going to tell her?" he asked. "We'll apologize," Desdemona replied. "We'll say that we realize our mistakes and are ready to make amends." "What if she doesn't forgive us?" Then, then we'll offer her a deal. We'll return the stolen money with interest. We'll give her back the restaurant in exchange for her silence." Caden nodded. It wasn't the best plan, but they had no other options. They went up to the porch and rang the doorbell. It was quiet inside the house, but the lights were still on. Caden rang the bell again, then knocked on the door. "Grandma, it's me, Caden. Please open the door. We need to talk." Silence. Desdemona put her ear to the door. "It sounds like someone's inside." "Grandma, we know you're home," Caden shouted louder. "Please listen to us." The neighbor's window across the street opened slightly, and an elderly woman peered out. "Young people, it's late at night. Stop making noise." "Sorry," Desdemona muttered. "We're trying to talk to our grandmother." "Mrs. Clancy doesn't want to talk to you," the neighbor replied curtly. "She asked me to tell you that if you don't leave, she'll call the police." Caden felt the ground slip away from under his feet. Not only was Bertha not going to listen to them, she was ready to call the authorities. "Tell her it's important," he pleaded. "It's about the restaurant." She said the restaurant is no longer her concern, and you know that better than anyone. The window slammed shut. Caden and Desdemona stood on the porch for a few more minutes, but it was clear that Bertha wasn't going to let them in. They returned to the car, feeling like complete idiots. "What now?" Desdemona asked. "I don't know," Caden replied gloomily. "Maybe we'll try again tomorrow, when she calms down." But he didn't believe his own words. The look on his neighbor's face made it clear that Bertha was serious and that she wasn't going to forgive them. They drove home in complete silence. Caden thought about how quickly his world was falling apart. That morning, he had been a restaurant owner, a successful businessman with big plans. Now he was a petty thief who had been caught red-handed. At home, Desdemona immediately went to the computer and started looking for information about the law firm Foster and Sons. Caden sat down in an armchair and looked through the photos again. In each one, he looked like a criminal, a thief who steals from his own grandmother. "Mr. Foster is a highly respected lawyer," Desdemona said, studying the screen. "He's been practicing for 40 years. He specializes in wills and family disputes." "So the documents are real?" "It looks that way. And if he really did draw up this will, we're in trouble. Foster is not the kind of person who compromises." Caden stood up and paced around the room. "Maybe we should talk to our lawyer, find out what our chances are?" "With these photos?" Desdemona shook her head. "Any lawyer will tell us one thing: prepare for the worst." Caden's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, an unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Clancy? This is Robert Foster from the law firm of Foster and Sons." Caden felt his heart sink. "Yes, that's me. I represent Mrs. Bertha Clancy. She asked me to tell you that she will be waiting for you in my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss the situation." "What situation?" Caden tried to play dumb. "Mr. Clancy, let's not waste time playing games. You have received the materials your grandmother left behind. Tomorrow we will discuss possible solutions to the problem. What if I don't come? Then, in the afternoon, the materials will be handed over to the police and the prosecutor's office. The choice is yours." The connection was cut off. Caden slowly put the phone down on the table. "Who was that?" Desdemona asked. "Grandma's lawyer. We have to be at his office tomorrow at 10 in the morning." "What if we don't go?" Then he'll take the photos to the police. Desdemona covered her face with her hands. We're screwed, caught like idiots. Caden sat down next to her on the sofa. 12 hours ago, they were making plans to expand the restaurant, dreaming of profits, arguing with the designer about the new interior. And now they were facing prison. Maybe it's not so bad. He tried to console himself. Maybe she just wants to scare us, to make us return the money. Did you see her face today? Desdemona raised her head. When you told her to get lost, she's not going to forgive us. She wants revenge. And Caden realized his wife was right. Bertha really did want revenge, and she had all the tools to do it. Evidence of their crime, a good lawyer, and the iron will of a person who had been betrayed by those closest to her. He remembered how she looked as she left the restaurant. Calm, even majestic, not at all like a broken old woman who had just been humiliated, more like a person who was going to carry out a long-planned scheme. Tomorrow we'll find out what she wants from us, he said wearily. For now, all we can do is wait. But inside, he already knew the answer. Bertha wanted justice. And for people who betray their family, justice usually turns out to be very expensive. On Saturday morning at exactly 10 o'clock, I was sitting in Mr. Foster's office waiting. The old lawyer laid out all the documents in front of him: photographs, records of thefts, copies of the will, my letter describing yesterday's events. Everything was ready for the decisive conversation. Caden and Desdemona were 15 minutes late. When the secretary showed them into the office, I saw that they looked terrible. Caden was unshaven, his suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were red from a sleepless night. Desdemona tried to hide her fatigue under a thick layer of makeup, but it didn't help. They looked like people who had spent the night in hell. "Sit down," Mr. Foster said dryly, pointing to the chairs across from his desk. "I assume you understand why you are here." Caden swallowed several times before speaking. "Mr. Foster, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" The lawyer picked up one of the photos. "You call systematically stealing money from your own grandmother for 3 months a misunderstanding?" We can explain everything." "Explain." Caden looked helplessly at Desdemona, then at me. I sat upright, my hands folded in my lap, and stared at him expressionlessly. The kind of look you give a stranger who has done something despicable. "Grandma, please," he began, addressing me directly. "I know we did the wrong thing, but it wasn't out of greed. We were having financial difficulties." "Financial difficulties?" I repeated calmly. "For someone who buys $500 suits and drives a new car?" It was necessary for work. We had to maintain our image." Desdemona leaned forward. "Bertha, we understand that we've hurt you. We're willing to pay you back every penny, with interest." $4,243, I said, "plus interest for 3 months. That comes to about 5,000. "Yes, of course, we'll pay it all at once." I looked at Mr. Foster. "What about the emotional damage? The fact that my own grandson stole from me for 3 months? The fact that yesterday he told me to get lost and kicked me out of my own restaurant?" Caden cringed. I I didn't mean to say that. I was upset, nervous about the renovations." "You were nervous?" My voice hardened. "And how did I feel when I discovered the money was missing? When I realized that my beloved grandson was stealing from me?" "Grandma, please forgive me. I was an idiot. We were both idiots." Desdemona nodded in agreement with her husband. "We realize the gravity of our actions. We are willing to accept any conditions, as long as we can make things right." "Any conditions?" I stood up and walked to the window. "All right, my conditions are very simple." They froze in anticipation. "The restaurant is mine again, immediately. All documents regarding the transfer are invalid. But, Caden began. Second, I continued, not letting him finish, you will reimburse not only the stolen money, but also all the costs of the repairs that were carried out without my consent, and you will restore the hall to its original appearance. That's another 10,000, Desdemona whispered. Third, you will publicly apologize to all of our regular customers for the inconvenience caused. Grandma, that's humiliating. No more humiliating than theft. And fourth, you will never come near my restaurant again or interfere in my business. Silence hung in the office. Caden and Desdemona exchanged glances, clearly trying to figure out if they had a choice. What if we don't agree? Desdemona asked cautiously. Mr. Foster answered for me. Then on Monday morning, all the materials will be handed over to the prosecutor's office. Theft of more than $4,000 is a criminal offense punishable by imprisonment. But we're family, Caden exploded. How can you put your own grandson in jail? My own grandson doesn't steal from his grandmother, I replied coldly. A real grandson doesn't tell her to get lost in gratitude for all her care and love. He jumped up from his chair and came over to me. Grandma, I understand that you're angry, but we can work this out as a family. Why involve lawyers and the police? Because you stopped being my family yesterday when you showed your true colors. Don't say that. You know I love you. Love me? I turned to him. Love doesn't steal money. Love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't use trust for its own benefit. Caden tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. Grandma, give me a chance to make it right. I'll return the restaurant, return the money, do whatever you say. It's too late, much too late. But why? Why can't you forgive me? I looked at him long and hard, trying to find in his face at least something of the boy I had raised. But all I saw was a grown man who had been caught stealing and was now trying to wriggle out of it. Because forgiveness must be earned, and you don't even understand what you've done. I understand. We stole your money. It was despicable. It's not just about the money, I interrupted him. It's about trust, about the fact that you destroyed everything we had. Every time you hugged me, said you loved me, asked for help with money, you were lying. Because at the same time, you were planning how to rob me. Desdemona stood up and came over to us. Bertha, we didn't plan it. It just happened. Caden just saw that there was a lot of money in the safe and thought he could take someone else's money because his grandmother was old and wouldn't notice? No, he thought that since the restaurant would soon be ours, the money would be ours too. But the restaurant wasn't yours yet, and the money wasn't yours either. You're just thieves, ordinary thieves who steal from defenseless people. Caden sank into a chair and covered his face with his hands. What do you want me to say? That I'm a scoundrel? That I betrayed you? Fine, I admit it. I betrayed you. I deceived you. I stole from you. Are you satisfied now? No, I replied calmly. I'm not satisfied. I'm hurt. It hurts to realize that the person I loved more than anyone else in the world was capable of such meanness. Then punish me, but don't ruin my whole life. Your life? Who ruined my life? You took away my life's work, kicked me out of my own restaurant, trampled on the memory of my grandfather. Desdemona tried to intervene. We can restore everything to the way it was. We'll bring back the old furniture, find that piano. The piano was antique, 100 years old. I said wearily, it's impossible to find another one. Then we'll buy another one, a similar one. No need, it's too late to fix anything. Mr. Foster looked at his watch. I think it's time to make a decision. Mrs. Clancy has laid out her terms. Do you accept them or not? Caden and Desdemona exchanged glances. I could see them mentally calculating their losses. The restaurant they already considered theirs, the money spent on renovations, the opportunity to make money on new plans. What if we agree only to return the stolen money? Desdemona suggested. Without the restaurant. Let it remain yours, but at least we won't go to court. No, I replied firmly. Either all my conditions or we'll see you in court. But that's ruin, exclaimed Caden. We don't have that kind of money. Then sell your car, mortgage your apartment, find a loan, like all honest people do when they need money. Do you want to destroy us? I want justice. You got the restaurant by fraud, so you have to give it back. You stole the money, so you have to pay it back with interest. You destroyed the interior without permission, so you have to restore it. And then what? Then we'll be left penniless and without work? Then you'll live off your labor, like all normal people. Caden stood up and began pacing around the office. I can't do that. Do you understand? I physically can't. We don't have that kind of money. Then go to prison for 3 to 5 years. Grandma, he stopped in front of me. You can't seriously want your grandson to go to prison? My grandson died yesterday when he told me to get lost, and you're just a stranger to me who committed a crime. Tears welled up in his eyes. Don't say that, please. Why? Does it hurt you to hear the truth now? I'll make amends. I swear I'll never again. It's too late for promises. The time for promises is over. Desdemona tried one last time. What if we leave town? Leave for good, and you'll never see us again. And leave me to deal with the consequences of your fixing? No way. Mr. Foster glanced at his watch again. We have another meeting scheduled. We need to make a decision. Caden knelt down in front of me. I had never seen him like this before, broken, desperate, willing to do anything for forgiveness. Grandma, I beg you, for Grandpa's sake, for Mom's sake, don't ruin me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm not asking for justice. I'm asking for mercy. The memory of Harold tugged at my heart. What would he have said if he had seen this scene? Would he have forgiven his grandson or supported me? But then I remembered how calmly Caden had counted the stolen money, how he had smiled at Desdemona after the successful theft, how they had made plans at my expense, thinking I was a stupid old woman. No, I said quietly but firmly. Grandfather taught me that you have to take responsibility for your actions, and that betraying your family is the worst sin. So it's decided? Asked Mr. Foster. It's decided. If my conditions are not met by Monday, refer the case to the prosecutor's office. Caden slowly rose from his knees. His face was deathly pale, his eyes empty. So you really want to destroy me? I want you to take responsibility for your actions. All right, he said, almost in a whisper. All right, I understand. You're not a grandmother anymore. You're a judge and an executioner rolled into one. And you're not a grandson anymore. You're just a thief who got caught. He turned and walked toward the door. Desdemona rushed after him. Caden, wait, maybe we can work something out. But he had already left the office, slamming the door so hard that the windows rattled. Mr. Foster carefully gathered the documents. It's a difficult decision, Bertha, but it's the right one. Are you sure? On Monday, there will be no turning back. I looked out the window, where Caden was getting into his car. Desdemona was saying something heatedly to him, waving her arms, but he sat motionless, staring straight ahead. I'm sure some things cannot be forgiven. The car pulled away and disappeared around the bend. Caden was driving toward his ruin, and he knew it. He knew he had lost everything: the restaurant, the money, his family. He knew that betrayal comes at a high price, and I finally felt that justice would prevail. Monday dawned gray and rainy. I woke up early, as usual, But for the first time in 30 years, I didn't have to rush to the restaurant. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee and watched the raindrops run down the glass. At 10 o'clock, Mr. Foster was supposed to call and let me know whether Caden had met my conditions or not. The call came at 10 sharp. The lawyer's voice was calm and businesslike. Bertha, your grandson did not show up at the office. The documents for the return of the restaurant have not been signed, and the monetary compensation has not been paid. In accordance with our agreement, I am referring the matter to the prosecutor's office. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Part of me had hoped until the very last moment that Caden would come to his senses, find the strength to admit his mistakes, and try to make amends. But he chose a different path. All right, Mr. Foster, do what you have to do. What about the restaurant? Formally, it still belongs to Caden. The deal was made under duress and fraud. You have all the evidence. I think the court will declare it invalid. It will take time, a month, maybe two. I'll wait. After the call, I sat down in a chair and tried to understand what I was feeling. Relief, sadness, emptiness, probably all of the above. For 30 years, I dreamed of passing the restaurant on to my grandson, seeing it as a continuation of the family tradition. And now I realized that I no longer had a family in the traditional sense of the word. But, strangely enough, this realization did not frighten me. Rather, it liberated me. I no longer had to pretend that Caden loved me. I no longer had to turn a blind eye to his shortcomings, to justify his actions with maternal love. I could just live for myself. In the afternoon, Maria, a waitress from the restaurant, called. Her voice sounded confused. Mrs. Clancy, what's going on? Caden hasn't been to work for 3 days. The restaurant is closed, and we haven't been paid. I explained the situation to her in general terms, without going into details about the thefts. I told her that the restaurant would reopen soon, and everyone would get their money. So, you're coming back? Maria asked happily. Yes, but not right away. I need to take care of some legal formalities. After talking to Maria, I realized that I missed my job. I missed the morning hustle and bustle, the smell of fresh bread, and chatting with regular customers. The restaurant wasn't just a business, it was my life, my home, my calling. The next day, I went to see the building. The restaurant was indeed closed, with a sign on the door saying, "Temporarily closed." Through the windows, I could see the tasteless furniture that Caden and Desdemona had put in, the bare walls from which the paintings had been removed. I felt sad at the sight of this desolation. A place that had been full of life and warmth for 30 years now looked dead. But I knew it was temporary. Soon everything would come back to life. A week later, Mr. Foster announced that Caden had been arrested. They took him at home early in the morning in front of his neighbors. Desdemona tried to post bail, but the amount was beyond her means. He asked me to tell you that he is willing to accept any conditions as long as the case does not go to court, said the lawyer. It's too late, I replied. Are you sure? A trial means publicity, exposure. Everyone will find out about your family problems. Let them find out. I'm not going to hide anything. Mr. Foster paused. Bertha, I understand your pain. But think about it. Is it worth ruining a young man's life over $4,000? It's not about the money. It's about the principle. Someone has to show him that actions have consequences. But he's your grandson. He was. Now he's just a criminal who must be punished. The trial took place a month later. I was the main witness for the prosecution. I sat in the courtroom and watched as Caden answered the judge's questions. He looked haggard, aged, broken. Desdemona sat in the front row and cried. Caden's lawyer tried to present the case as a family conflict, a misunderstanding between grandmother and grandson. But the evidence was too obvious. The photographs, recordings, and witness statements left no doubt about his guilt. The court sentenced Caden to 2 years probation and damages. Desdemona was fined as an accomplice. The restaurant transfer deal was declared invalid. When the verdict was read, Caden looked straight at me. There was so much pain and resentment in his eyes that for a moment I felt sorry for him. But then I remembered his words, "Get lost," and my pity disappeared. After the trial, Desdemona approached me. Her face was tear-stained, her makeup smudged. "Are you satisfied?" she asked with hatred. "Justice has prevailed," I replied calmly. "You ruined our lives. You ruined your own life when you decided to steal. He's your grandson. How could you do that to your family?" Families don't steal from each other. Families don't betray each other's trust. Desdemona turned and left, slamming the courtroom door loudly behind her. I never saw her again. It took another 2 months to restore the restaurant. I brought back the old furniture. I had to buy exact replicas because Caden and his wife had sold the originals. I ordered copies of the paintings that had hung on the walls. I couldn't find the piano, but I bought another one, an antique, very similar to the one we had before. The hardest part was explaining to our regular customers what had happened. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, Mr. Francis, and other regulars had all known Caden since childhood and remembered him as a little boy who helped out in the restaurant. "How could this happen?" they asked. "People change," I replied, "not always for the better, but most of them understood and supported my decision." "You did the right thing, Bertha," said Mr. Francis. "You can't let relatives walk all over you." The restaurant reopened in early December, just before Christmas. On the first day, so many people came that we could barely keep up with the orders. Everyone wanted to support me, to show that they were on my side. In the evening, when the last customer left, I was alone in the dining room. Everything was as before. Familiar tables, paintings, smells. It was as if the nightmare with Caden and Desdemona had never happened. But I knew that a lot had changed. First of all, I myself had changed. I no longer had a naive belief in family ties, in the idea that blood relations automatically meant love and loyalty. Now I understood that family is not only about genes, but also about actions, not only about words, but also about deeds. A week after the opening, an unfamiliar man came to see me. He was tall, gray-haired, dressed in a simple but well-made suit. "Mrs. Clancy, my name is David Harris. I'm the director of a homeless shelter." I was wary. "How can I help you?" "I was told that our shelter is mentioned in your will." "Yes, but that's in case of my death or other special circumstances." He smiled. "I'm not here for money. I just wanted to meet you and thank you for remembering us." We started talking. David told me about the work of the shelter, the people who live there, and how difficult it is to find funding for such institutions. His sincere concern for the fate of homeless people touched me. "You know," he said as he left, "if you ever want to help while you're alive, we would be very grateful. It doesn't have to be money. It can be food, clothing, just human compassion." After he left, I thought about our words for a long time. I have a restaurant, a house, savings, and no more relatives trying to take it away from me. Maybe it's time to think about more than just myself. On Sunday, I made a big pot of soup and took it to the shelter. David greeted me warmly and introduced me to the residents. They were ordinary people who, for various reasons, had hit rock bottom. A former engineer who lost his job and home due to illness, a young woman with a child who had fled from her abusive husband, an elderly man who had been kicked out by his children after they sold their parents' house. Their stories reminded me that betrayal by loved ones is not so rare, and that sometimes strangers turn out to be closer than blood relatives. Now I come to the shelter every Sunday. I bring food, sometimes old clothes, but most importantly, I just talk to people. They tell me their stories, and I share my experiences and give advice. Many of them eventually get back on their feet, find work, and rent a place to live. Things have also improved at the restaurant. Regular customers have returned, and new ones have appeared. Maria and the other employees work twice as hard. They understand that they could have lost their jobs because of someone else's greed. Sometimes, in the evenings, when the restaurant is empty, I sit at an old table by the window and think about my life. About Harold, who would probably approve of my decision. About Gretchen, who would be upset to learn what her son has become. About Caden, whom I loved like a son and who betrayed that love. It hurts to remember him, but I don't regret my choice. Some lessons can only be learned through pain. And if Caden ever realizes what he has done, maybe he will become a better person. And I will continue to live. Without illusions, but also without bitterness. With the understanding that family is not only those who are related to you by blood, but also those who are ready to support you in difficult times. That love should not only be given, but also protected from those who try to use it. I am 75, and I have finally learned to live for myself, not out of selfishness, but out of wisdom. Because only by learning to value yourself can you truly help others. And every day, when I open the restaurant, I know that this place will exist as long as I am alive. And after my death, it will help those who need it. This is more honest and noble than giving it to people who see it only as a source of easy money. Betrayal taught me to live without betrayal, and this is perhaps the most valuable lesson in my life.